Hey, friends. So I am beside myself because this is a subject that just hits at home for me. If you know my three sweet girls I met, and you guys are the internet aunties, so you know about our babies. And I met them, when their mother was, on the side of the road in Baltimore City. And, she's had a really diverse life experience. And if you've read the book, you know more about that. But you also know that the unhoused, people experiencing homelessness, is a constant conversation. And the reality is, a lot of us don't know much about what that is actually like. And we may have preconceived notions. We may have things that we've been told by the media, but that's not what we do here, right? What we do here is we go right to the source. We ask someone who has either experienced it or is just 1 degree removed from those who have, to learn what we need to know and what we can do. And today's guest is someone who is redefining what it means to deliver healthcare with compassion, with innovation, with heart. And that's Dr. Indu Subaiya. Now, she is the CEO of Healthcare in Action, which is this incredible organization. I'm not kidding. Google will have the details in the show notes, but they're providing street medicine and housing navigation for people experiencing homelessness across California. So Healthcare in Action, it's her and her teams, and they're meeting people where they are. So whether that's in tents, whether that's in cars, in shelters, temporary housing, they're going to them, and they're providing not just medical care, but mental health services, substance use support, chronic disease management, help with food, with housing, insurance access. And y'all, this work, her work, it helps remind us how meaningful that care, trust, and advocacy can be, and how it can transform lives. And all since this episode is airing on Giving Tuesday, there's no better time to reflect on what it is to engage in the power of giving, whether it's your time or your resources or your voice. We all have that to give. And I want to make sure we're supporting the people who need it most. So Dr. Subaiya's work is the perfect example of exactly that. And Dr. Subaiya, I am so thrilled and so grateful to have you on the Tell Me More podcast today. Thank you for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here, and you can call me Indu.
Of course I can call you Indu, because that's who you are. You're super down to earth. Y'all, you don't even know. And I came in and I was like, this woman, she walks on water to me. Okay, where is her halo? Will her wings clear the doorway? Because she is out here battling for sainthood. You are doing such incredible work.
It really is all about our frontline staff that are out there every single day. But thank you so much. And it's great to just share a little bit about our story with you. And I love just the tone you set about your own experience. So, yeah.
We all have an experience, I think, one way or another, whether we are blessed to not have to worry about experiencing homelessness, or we've been in situations in the past where we knew that we may be one check or one diagnosis away from experiencing homelessness. So I really appreciate you. So I'm going to kick you off with our question, right? Which is always our first one. If there was one thing that you wanted to blast into anyone's brain, people who may have thoughts about what it is to be unhoused, or people who are experiencing homelessness, there was one thing you wish that you could change right out of the gate about what they're thinking, what would it be?
Well, believe it or not, a lot of people think people don't want housing. They don't want to be helped. They're there because in some way they're like refusing services. And it's sort of a choice in some way. So let's kind of break that down a little bit.
Okay. Okay. That's actually mind-blowing to me, because,
yes.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food, shelter, like water, these are just, so the idea that is the number one thing that you kind of confront in your professional expertise, is that people think that people just don't want it. Can you tell me more about that? Break that down for us.
Absolutely. So if you think about offering somebody housing, and they may say, well, no, or, maybe they're not accepting of it right away. The facts are that it is sometimes a very traumatizing experience to go into housing right away from the streets. In fact, studies have shown that the death rate in shelters has increased over the last number of years, and sometimes in some parts of California, twice as high as the death rate in jails.
What does that mean?
It means that when people who live with homelessness or experience homelessness, for the most part, are struggling with some aspect of a medical need, a mental health need, a behavioral health need. If you don't address that and you just drop that person into housing without any care, you've removed them from their social network, you remove them from their informal community, they can actually deteriorate and do worse in housing without a care model that goes along with it. So we'll often hear, even from cities that are trying to do the right thing across California, whose hearts are in the right places, well, we're trying, but people don't want the help. And I just want to be really clear about that unless we equip housing environments with supportive services, it can actually be an environment that sets people back.
Wow. This is actually surprisingly powerful, but also surprisingly simple, right? Because oftentimes you'll hear people kind of casually say, well, the problem is homelessness, give them homes.
That's right.
But it's an oversimplification that actually could be harmful, because ultimately it's not just about providing housing, it's about providing, 360 support. And I think we all can relate to this. And y'all, if you're listening, if we're just mamas at home listening while, taking our jog or in the kitchen, I know it can feel kind of heavy, but I think we can relate to this, right? When we send our kid off to college and we want our kid to do well in school, it's not just about putting them in a great institution. They need to have food, tutoring support, mental health care, fun, all of these things. Otherwise, their rate of success in college actually plummets. Is that kind of what you're describing here?
Absolutely. You've kids that win scholarships that are brilliant. And then, the dropout rates sometimes, if you're not supporting somebody through that process with their whole person needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something. So that's one thing, that there is housing, but they're not accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
The other argument that tends to just sort of
and these are all just kind of myths, right?
They're
People
myths.
just believe that it's just not true. Okay.
And the other part is, well, there's nothing you can do unless there's housing. So well, there isn't enough housing and therefore somebody has to languish on the streets, that there's nothing in between. That's not true. So street medicine is actually showing that if you can go out there and help somebody with their diabetes, their hepatitis, their HIV, if they have an active psychotic condition, if they're using and need help, you can treat that and stabilize that on the street so that while they're waiting for housing, right? Because we all wish we could magically snap our fingers.
Sure.
While they're waiting for housing, they can have a more stable life. They can start to have a longer planning horizon, start to make some of those decisions, even while they're still outside, to get their lives back on track.
So I want to challenge some of my own preconceived notions, right? And I always put myself in the hot seat here because I'm learning too. So when you say they can have a more stable life while still, say, living in the tent or living in their car, living, on the street, to me, that doesn't sound like stability, even if it's street medicine. And my brain operates in all or none. So, I am very that's just sort of my hardwiring. We have to do everything, and it's and I know that some people think, well, if I'm going to do that only for them to either, continue to use, or if I'm going to, treat the diabetes, but they're still subject to the elements and the climate and food insecurity, it can feel sort of like, how is this helping? Can you just tell me a little bit more about how that is valuable?
Right. It absolutely is valuable. So we know horrible statistics, and depending on which ones you've heard, but 7 people dying on the street every day in Los Angeles alone, right?
People don't know that. That's horrendous.
This is, and we can say which part of the city, which part of the state and county, but it is a high rate. It is an unacceptable rate. Vehicle accidents, like literally, street accidents or from overdose. So it's not even just one cause of death, but so that if that's not urgent enough to sort of stabilize someone medically, I think the other piece is that we are so excited to share with this community, with your listeners, that even in the last year and a half, how you can treat on the street has changed. Mm-hmm. So it used to be like, say somebody's experiencing a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. Well, you have to take a pill and you have to swallow it and you have to stay on it every single day.
Yeah, that's just hard to do, honestly, when you have a home.
That's right.
I'm a mom with a baby.
That's right.
I can barely take my vitamins. Did I take a shower today? I think I did. Roll the dice.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So,
and there's now this whole category of treatment, which are called long-acting injectables, where a licensed clinician can inject a medicine that will be in your system for 30 days. And you don't have to do anything every day. But those psychotic symptoms that are making you out of your mind and unfortunately taking off your clothes and causing, it's not people's choice. They're suffering from a mental health condition.
Yes.
If you can get them stable, even while they're still outside, then maybe they can fill out that paperwork to get into housing. Maybe we can have a conversation now about where your documents are. Mm-hmm. So many people living outside, one of the barriers to getting housed is our system requires a lot of paperwork. You need to know where your driver's license is. And folks have those stolen from them repeatedly. They are either stolen or sometimes
or displaced. I mean,
right.
honestly, like,
Yes.
let's just be honest. Everyone right now, where do we keep all of our stuff? Our mom's house, right? We're not even stable enough to keep it in our own home. You know, if I need my social security card, I'm calling my mom. I'm whatever, you know? So, I mean, these are all the privileges that we don't even recognize because they're so, we've absorbed the benefits, but I can't imagine what it's like having to keep a passport or an ID or, you know, health insurance information or, you know, paperwork around a hospital visit.
Absolutely. And we're now looking for ways in which we can offer a PO box at our offices or offer virtual PO boxes. There's some innovation now to have this digital for folks through services like ours, but that's a huge barrier that people don't understand. Even if somebody wants housing and is ready, if they're not medically able to just sort of relax and be momentarily stabilized, that gets kicked down the road. And there you go. And then people say, well, look, we're trying to help. And so the long-acting injectable treatments have been helping for opioid use, for HIV, for psychosis. And it has changed the game, allowing us to be helpful right away while we then wait for this long queue, which is just unfortunate, no matter where you are in this country.
Well, I will also say, I think that one thing that we all can appreciate in listening to this is that easing someone's suffering, even if it is for 30 days, you know, easing the challenge is worthy, you know? So if what we can do is provide them more comfort, you know, while they're dealing with challenges that may be imposed upon them, not something they elected, you know, is tremendous. So I think kind of going back to some of those imposed versus elected, you know, a lot of these myths, you know, you were kind of hitting some points there. So the first one being that, you know, they do want help. You know, it's not that they don't want help, but there may be barriers and, you know, can you tell me some more? Like what?
Yeah,
else
I mean, and the other thing is like,
you know?
I think you got to ask like 5 times, 10 times. So not once, like, you know, because I think when your trust is so broken with every sort of institutional encounter you've had probably for years, for many of the folks that we serve, 54% of people report that even when they go into a healthcare setting, no one's asking them about their housing needs, their economic needs. They're just sort of looking the other way. So even when people do come into the traditional healthcare system, like go into a clinic or go into an emergency department, they're treated terribly often. There's often a ton of stigma. I was once listening to a panel of folks who had experienced homelessness and had found their way to housing. And they said, I felt more of a lack of dignity. I was treated more poorly in the healthcare system than I've ever been on the streets.
Wow.
They preferred the respect and the safety of the streets than the way they were treated in a traditional healthcare setting. And so when we say we're here to help and can we help? And they say no, I think that's fair.
I can understand that. Like not to mention other complications, pride. You know what I mean? Like we're all people deserving of dignity and we're all so much more than our lowest moment. And I can understand that it, you know, when it can feel like you may not have much else, you know, having your pride is something that's worth holding. And I can understand being inclined to say no.
Absolutely. And I think one of the ways street medicine works, not just our organization, but many of the people in this space that we're in, is about that dignity and that rapport building. Some of our people at HIA will say, I see myself in the people that we work with. And I think I do too. And I think it's that kind of a person that comes to the organization that when we connect, even with those first words, or do you want some water? It is more than a job. Like you're really connecting from the heart and that shifts the game. And then you start and you say, well, that wound looks really rough. Do you think I could help you with that?
So take me into one of those, because I think that, you know, we don't get to shadow the work, you know, and a lot of people are raised with the stigma of it's unsafe to engage, you know, it is unsafe to even see people's humanity and that we just need to walk by, you know, and this sort of silent plague that we complain about, we don't talk about, you know, these very real humans, you know, that are just like us and literally a month ago could have been the person who was serving us our coffee or the person who was our boss, you know, we don't know. So
or the person who's serving you your coffee, in fact, is homeless. So, you know, this is about this other myth, which is that 40 to 60% of people experiencing homelessness have jobs. So I was just this is in LA City. This was like a month ago. Okay, so this is real life right now, where we had a wonderful, we call it an inside safe operation to get people from encampments into emergency housing in our city. And when we do those, we show up, we give people lots of advance notice and we support our electeds. And we do this as a big interdisciplinary team. One person who came toward the end of the day was rushing over and she said, did I miss the chance to get on the bus to go to the motel to get housed? And she said, I'm so sorry. I was running late from work. So she had arrived back to the tent and was so scared that she had missed the bus to get her off the streets because she wanted to finish her shift at work. And I just really want people to hear that and understand that. And that face of homelessness, it's not just people with jobs, it's kids.
So roughly how many kids are currently, if we talk about LA and the surrounding areas?
Yeah, I think if you look at LA and the Inland Empire, we're talking about up to 20,000 kids in the school districts are experiencing homelessness. And it may not mean that they're sleeping outside in unsheltered environments, but we call being unhoused if you're living in someone's garage, if you're living on someone's couch permanently and moving from home to home, if you're in a shelter. So these are students showing up to class every single day, but that are actually homeless.
See, this is just one child is too many.
Yes.
One person is too many, but I think it always hits harder when we think of the extra vulnerable, the children, the elderly, the disabled, our veterans, But aside from that, I also think that there's such a huge gap that you're talking about here in insecurity. I think that we often think of the have and the have-nots, and it's easier to say you either have a home or you don't have a home. But not knowing, my girls used to talk about this and they've spoken about this publicly, so I know I can share it, but their biggest concern was every time I come home, will I be evicted? Every time I come home, if I'm getting off the bus and I see stuff outside, they start scanning it to see if they recognize anything in the pile because they were worried that would be theirs, and I don't know. And I hope everyone hears this, what that does for the psyche when you feel like if you're already unhoused, at least, hopefully, your tent will be there because there's also a sense of community amongst other people looking out for each other's stuff and things like that. But ultimately, a little girl going to school every single day, not knowing if her doll or her clothes or anything will be there when she comes back, cannot engage in school properly.
No.
Are you seeing that?
Yes. I mean, I think when you describe young people, that is super heartbreaking and absolutely. And not only that, but we now know that folks coming out of foster care, aging out of the foster system, who have dealt with that uncertainty about, well, am I going into this person's home or is this a permanent home? Is this my forever home? Now have to deal with homelessness. Fastest rising group. The other group of people where my heart breaks in terms of that sort of sense of insecurity are our seniors. So I went to high school in the 90s and college in the 90s. Back then it was about 10% of the homeless or the unhoused were over the age of like 55, right? Right now it is literally nearly half of homeless folks.
Like, what is happening?
That's right. And I think if you think about it, when you're on a fixed income, right. And you now have like
rising costs,
that's
inflation, housing is so expensive, you've got 30-year-olds talking about not being able to afford rent. What is it like when you don't work and you're 75?
This is a shocking statistic, but it is the fastest growing group of people who are homeless are our seniors. And I think there is something that we can all agree. I mean, it's like, all of this, everyone should agree is not acceptable, yes. But it is when you look into the faces of, like you said, children, older adults, it really, really doubles down on the degree of unacceptableness. And I think here, the other piece to bring up with getting older is medical debt and medical issues. So here we are, a healthcare provider, but 100 million Americans today carry medical debt. Of those, 1 in 5 have had to leave their housing because of it. Maybe they've had to move to a cheaper apartment. Maybe they've had to become unhoused. That is something we have to contend with as a country.
That makes me enraged. It's absolutely outrageous, especially knowing that in other societies, fully westernized societies, just North Canada, people are not losing their homes due to medical debt. So, a lot of the things that, may have made them unhoused, due to medical debt, we're not talking about I needed open heart surgery because you're living on the streets, right? It's not that. It's, I couldn't afford my diabetes medication.
Sure. Or one accident, you had to go into the emergency department. They hit you with an unbelievable bill and there you go.
Or cancer. My daughter is fine now, but the internet aunties who listen know she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and she's fine now. But her chemo process, all of that, it was multiple six figures. And if we fortunately could absorb that cost, but I could not imagine if I was 75 and getting that diagnosis. So I'm supposed to experience my final days or my final years on the street. And this is what you're actually legitimately seeing with your own eyes.
We are. And I think that one of the things that, we really believe strongly in is that as we address this crisis, well, one, I do want to send a message of hope. I really do.
I was going to say, let's shift into that too, because it's important to understand what we're confronting and being honest about it. It's not something to ignore, but there are things we can do.
Absolutely. And I think it comes, because we are a medical organization, the lens that we bring to the table is that you have to look at the health piece here in addition to this housing component, and they go together for us. So just as I said, having medical debt can throw you onto the streets, which is a link right there. Getting back into housing, you might not be able to unless your health is stabilized, because you may have a mental illness that's getting in the way, or you're using and need help with that first in order to get a little stable to then make those decisions. So for us, they're inextricable, right, the health and the housing. But the good news there is that we can do more through health services. And I think that one of the groups that hasn't really been at the table for many years, and now it's increasing, is the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. I think we have a role to play, even though we face cuts in Medicaid, both in California and around the country, we still can do work through that channel, through healthcare. We're working with, Cedars-Sinai and working through contracts with them and other hospitals where we can help somebody that's gone into the hospital that's homeless. Mm-hmm. And we can say, rather than just turn them back out, right? Hospitals now can be partners with us and say, can I call Healthcare in Action?
Right. Like if they've come in and we've somewhat stabilized them, we've identified other things, let's partner them with an organization so that it's not just a revolving door.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think that it gives me a lot of hope to think that we've had government kind of tackling homelessness. We've had the social service sector. Mm-hmm. We've had nonprofits. And we need everybody, but we also need healthcare at the table. So I'm really encouraged to see that. And I think that is starting to make a difference for all the reasons we've talked about. That if you can address some of those issues, it helps with the housing transition. And then when someone's in housing, another thing people don't know about is that even when you come into housing, about a third go back out, right? So
around what time? Like how long do people tend to stay in new stable housing?
Ideally, most people will stay in and go all the way to permanent supportive housing. That's the dream. And then in permanent supportive housing, they stay, and that's their forever home.
Right.
That's what we want.
Of course, that's the goal.
That's right. And Healthcare in Action in particular, we house about 28% of our patients all the way through, which is
amazing. And it does happen. Listen, if you can get one person,
that's right,
back into you've changed the trajectory of their life, so it's a big deal.
We do a whole move-in day thing.
No, tell me about the move-in day so that we can all collectively cry. Right. Grab your Kleenex. So what's move-in day like?
Move-in day is when we give somebody their keys and they will have a couch and a bed for the first time. And we will go on Amazon and we will buy the basic things that they need. And those move-in days are magical. And you will see people say, I've been outside for 10 years, 12 years. And all it took was a small team helping, as we said, with some of that paperwork, which would drive you and me insane if nobody was helping us. It does
drive us insane right now. I don't want to do the paperwork. I don't want to adult. Indu, I don't want to adult. Okay. So I think we can all relate to that a little bit, right? So I couldn't imagine having to do that and mind all the other complications that go with experiencing homelessness.
And the average person that we see, we just looked at some data recently, so it's brand new data, 7+ medical diagnoses, not one, 7 conditions. Ugh. Some have 15. So if you can help somebody there, help them with their paperwork, you can get them housed.
You're just lightening the load so they can carry what they can carry.
That's right.
Yes.
And then even then, people do leave housing sometimes. Mm-hmm. And there's many reasons for that. So we have to do more. We have to do better with our interim housing and our emergency housing, like we said. Not enough just
maintaining the support, not just saying because I honestly think the oversimplification is what happens. Yeah. We just say, well, what they need is a place to be. Yeah. So, and I'm going to be, ask some questions, some transparent questions because you're the expert here is, in LA, one of the things that I think was a talking point for a while was, well, we have all these motels and we're putting all this money into sheltering people in motels, but it's not actually solving the problem, and I think that you're kind of hitting at the crux of a lot of it is it isn't just a room. It's not a room for a night. It's what services are attached to these experiences, right?
And I think it's a huge start.
It's
And
a
mind
start.
you, we took a huge leap as a city
Mm-hmm.
making that available,
Yes.
and more power to us. But now let's layer that on with those
Mhm.
services and that care. And we are building this as we go. So it's not that you don't need those resources.
It's
You
one
do.
piece of it.
Yes, you need it. And together, then you advance from that immediate housing solution to a more stable one. I wish we could just snap our fingers and have all of this affordable housing come online. So it's time for us to think, how do we get there stage by stage and not have this sort of hopelessness along the way?
I want to ask you a big question.
Yeah.
Right. So, there's a lot of people who say no matter what, things have to change. We're coming up on the LA hosting the Olympics. We know that there's a lot of pressure around the optics of Los Angeles, which is kind of a sad thing to say when you're like, these are people's real lives. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? Let's figure out what we're going to do. So knowing that that's the case, if you were to snap your fingers and say, everyone's going to listen to you, I'm actually kind of plot twist surprising you with this question because I want to know, right? And I want everyone to kind of hold this in their hearts. What is the perfect solution? If money wasn't an object, if you had everyone on board, I want you to go down on paper saying, I told y'all this is what we needed to do. Okay. So what does it look like to do it right?
So I would start with saying that we need more people at the table to be part of this solution, to sit back and say, LA County has to fix it, or LA City has to fix it, or that even just the healthcare system has to fix it. I don't think we're going to get there, right? It's just not enough. And there's funding cuts. There are real constraints that even our best leaders are facing. So I think number one, I do think we need individuals to step up, businesses to step up, but I think it's confusing. It's like, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I sort of contribute? So we need more ways in which we can organize people to do charitable giving so that, the person that wants to give to a local food bank is wonderful, but maybe there's more we can do. And maybe we can get together and really fund something that's transitional housing in a certain community. So I think that's one thing. I think the sort of...
You would see more community-based activations where people are saying, look, in our neighborhood right now, we are noticing that there is a situation with an encampment forming. What can we do to support these people? Because there's also a possibility that these people used to live in the apartment next to you.
That's right.
So what does it look like to help our neighbor instead of looking at it as a, quote unquote problem, instead saying like, look, these are our people. What can we do to help?
I think that local mentality and that means so much. And in fact, there was a gentleman I met in the parking lot of Los Feliz, Hillhurst Avenue. My goodness, been there a million times, go to the Albertsons there all the time. He was living in his car for 5 years. And it was a black SUV, so it was fancy. Sure. So people thought it was just another person driving down from the hills of Los Feliz, right? But he lived there for 5 years on oxygen in his car.
And that's all he had.
That's what he had. And it was one of those things that to help him at the end of the day, it took neighbors, it took the local sort of, city council, it took Healthcare in Action, it took the local medical dispensary that was sending him his oxygen. And unfortunately, we lost him. He had end-stage lung disease. But at his memorial, you should have seen, we did an impromptu memorial at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf because that was his home, his spot. Sure. And people showed up and it was like a village showed up. And I wanted people, and none of them knew each other.
Of course.
They'd all been helping him, but they didn't know each other. So I want to let people know that it is hard to think Los Angeles as a whole, how do we solve this? But my neighborhood, my community, let me lean in. Let me ask around. Who can, if it's a church, if it's a, local business, people have raised their hands and say, what can I do? A lot,
That's so powerful. It's so powerful. And I think that if anything, sometimes, you get compassion fatigue with everything we're inundated with on the internet. It's more so than ever before. It's not just what's happening in our backyard. I'm also worried about the children in Gaza, and I'm also worried about the children in Sudan. I'm also worried about the children in the Congo. And sometimes it can feel like I'm not enough, but boy, oh boy, is that a great, powerful message where, each one reach one, and all the babies are ours. If we start looking at our neighbor and saying, look, if the one thing I can do is whenever I come downstairs, hey, how are you doing today? You know what I mean? Or if as I make my walk every single morning to go get a muffin, I always bring you your favorite muffin, like, and then if that builds the trust, reaching out to Healthcare in Action or someone and saying, hey, I know someone here and what resources can I get? But just sort of taking that awareness, and not kind of bypassing. Is that what that sounds like?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes people feel like, well, I'm not in this sort of world. I don't know anything about
you don't want to
homelessness.
mess up.
Right.
I think that let's have that honest, real conversation because I don't want to mess up. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to cause hurt.
Right.
So this is really powerful to hear that there are options available to us.
And I think you can even start by saying, is someone helping you? Are you getting help in some way? And what we want to start doing, you said, if I could snap my fingers, right? It would be that we actually would connect everyone to services. And believe it or not, that is a huge gap for those of us that are in the service industry. It isn't easy. It isn't easy to stay connected to folks. Folks move.
Yes,
right.
Of course.
Or they're forced to move.
They're forced to move.
And then you're like, well, I was helping them on Monday, but now it's Wednesday.
Can't find them. And I get, I'm like, I haven't seen you in like 3-4 days.
That's right.
Is everything okay? So
one way to help and to help us, we want people to be housed. We want people to not languish anymore. And you mentioned these external things like the Olympics coming, but the real motivation is to help people.
It should be, right?
That's you as a neighbor can be an ambassador to service providers. So you can get to know who's serving in your area. Someone is, I can promise you.
Yes.
Your local council district is trying to do something. So I would call your elected, I would call a nonprofit and start to realize that there are actually people there trying to help, but there are a lot of gaps.
We get to be eyes for them.
Yeah, that's right.
So if they're actually saying, hey, we're actually already helping this person and we haven't seen them, we didn't know they relocated here and they're due for their medicine dosage.
That's right.
Thank you so much for letting us know. We literally have helped in our tiny way of making one phone call and keeping someone stable.
Sometimes I'll wait with someone because I know someone's coming to help. This is even not me as a Healthcare in Action employee, but me just as a neighbor. Sometimes as simple as, well, we're coming tomorrow at 10 a.m. I could go out and say, I'm just going to make sure that we're here at 10 a.m. I'll just walk out and be there with you. That simple thing can change someone's trajectory. There was a lady who was living in a trailer, outside my home for many years. And we walked by and we said, is someone helping you? Are you getting help? And she'd had like a torn business card, of somebody that had come by. Somebody had tried to help. And I looked at the name and I said, I wonder if this is so-and-so. He wasn't at that organization anymore, but the name looked familiar. And it was one email. It was like one lookup.
Wow.
And he said, I've been trying to find her too. And then it was like matchmaking.
Of course. I mean,
and then they had
they
had a reconnection. And that same older lady got keys to her forever home about 2 months later. But it was as simple as that. And most people think, well, what can I do? Well, ask. Is someone helping you? And then maybe go through your local council member's office and start there. So,
I love this because it also is, I think, removing some of the pressure of us trying to figure out what to do, or feeling like there's a certain way we have to show up, and oftentimes I know that this is one of my things is I make things bigger than they need to be. Look, not everyone needs, a 3-course Thanksgiving dinner. You know what I mean? Oftentimes that may already be a need that's met, or they may have dietary restrictions, or they may have other health complications. Ask people what they want.
It's funny that you say that. The gentleman I mentioned who lived in his car, who became a friend, and he said, if one more person brings me a chicken, no,
because that's how Albert said, just bringing me a $5
he's like, I'm so grateful, but I cannot eat another chicken.
I get it.
It was very funny.
Because we're all and again, it's remembering that humanity. It's remembering, that we're all people. And so, I say this, and I shared a little story before we started about how, what led to me, becoming mother to my 3 babies and, them changing my life, was that I had made a promise to myself that I was going to not bypass, that if I saw someone who spoke to me, especially, if they reached out and said, could I have $1? Is there any food or whatever, outside of trying to do what I could, based on the request, if I couldn't do anything, I was at least going to take a moment to look them in the eyes, and afford them the same respect and dignity that any human deserves. And if I hadn't already made that promise to myself months prior, I never would have met my daughters.
Wow.
Because in pulling over that cold night in October, almost 11 years ago, it was doing just that. It was not driving past. It was saying, hey, there's a person with a need. What does it look like for me to just say, hey, how can I help? And that conversation turned into mom, and while again, I'm glad you're here because that's a very big story. People hear that story and they're like, I can't take in kids, and it's like, no, it was saying hello, and I did what I could that day.
I love that image of how the transformation to mom. And I think we can all like be metaphoric moms in a way. And even if I don't have space in my house, but I'll make space for stopping and saying hi.
In my heart. I can make space in my heart.
And it actually matters when you're living outside. Space is defined in a different way. Do you know what I mean? And so you can make somebody feel at home, even if they're outside, by you just walking by and having that regular interaction and caring. I will say though, I understand sometimes there's fear, and we have to be careful, of course, because in certain moments, even individuals who are well-meaning might not be in a stable place. Sure. So I do advise, like, nobody needs to be a hero. We even train our own staff, our own professional staff will sometimes go 2 at a time, into spaces, or sometimes they will leave a space if it's not safe at that moment, and they will call in for the right resources. So I want people to not feel like they need to be heroes and go into environments that they're not comfortable going into. But yes, for the most part, safely, you can have a conversation with somebody. And if something is escalating and somebody is maybe not in a stable moment in their lives, they're having a bad day.
Yeah, experiencing being unwell. And absolutely.
We're lucky to live in a city with unarmed response, which means you don't have to call 911. You can call
That's
the
actually
circle
really
group.
valuable information. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I do think people have an inclination to call in policing services by default because they don't know. And for those of you who might be hearing this and saying like, well, I want to call the police or whatever. Just remember, the police don't want to respond to these calls because that's not part of their job description, and they're not empowered or equipped to do so. So who is the right person to call?
So we have put up a program in Los Angeles where you can call the non-emergency LAPD line and say, I'd like to be referred to homeless crisis group. And, it used to be one group called Circle. I think they're changing that up now, but there will be an unarmed response that will come, somebody without weapons, somebody who will be able to actually get the person into services. And that idea is actually going across the country, by the way. It's not just in Los Angeles. And if you have to call 911, we're doing a lot of education with our police department, our sheriff's departments to say, even if you get the call, you can respond, but call us.
Yes,
so that we can also show up
to do this.
We can pull up and we can then make sure that, is this a criminal situation? If so, we'll step away. But if it's not, we've got this.
That's great. Oh,
yeah.
We've got this. We've got this. God bless you. So I can say also, with this work, substance abuse support, chronic disease management, food, housing, insurance, all the things, we're not expected as everyday individuals to be and do all those things. But what I'm hearing from you is there's so much that can come from just helping you all do your work. So if we notice that, an encampment has formed or somebody who's, seems displaced or unhoused or is experiencing homelessness is in our neighborhood, sometimes it's just going online and saying, hey, there's someone here I may not feel comfortable approaching, but do you have a recommendation, or is this something that you guys can do, or can you point me in the right direction to get them assistance?
So what we want to create is a system where we say sort of there should be multiple front doors, and you shouldn't have to worry about, am I going through the right one? But one that's super easy, especially if you live in Los Angeles, is you can absolutely call your supervisor or your council district member. You have one of those, depending on where you live, especially in LA. And now it is such a big issue. We raised over $1 billion in LA County through Measure A. So it is on people's radar. If someone is not able to direct you to the right resource, start there. If you enter you don't know what that is or how to even, I don't know who my supervisor is, that's fine. Yeah. Maybe you do know of a local nonprofit, call them. Okay. Because they're probably plugged in
and that's just
to the
a
network.
Google away, right?
It's a Google away. Yeah. And usually even your local church will probably have some outreach. Find somebody in that system and they will likely know other people. We talk about almost there being kind of like an underground network sometimes among those of us that do this work, where we know each other.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to find one of us.
Yeah, right. And if someone doesn't know, I always say this, like in business, I'll tell people when they, call my consulting firm and they're like, I don't even know what I need. And I'm like, well, give me an idea. Because if I can't do it, I probably know someone who I can get you to, so that's good to hear. And I just have to ask, I always like to leave people on this note because you've given us so much clarity, I think, around what the situation really is, and I also think you've given us a lot of hope and tools, but I also want to, in sort of coupling with some of these myths and misconceptions and mindsets, what is a big ask, like if there's something we could do, whether it's around our mind or in terms of, we have some action steps you've given us. And obviously everyone can donate. I'll have the details below. It is Giving Tuesday to Healthcare in Action. But if there was one ask you could give all of us, really about how we show up, because people listening right now are, we have listeners across the world, so if there was an ask around how we approach those experiencing homelessness, those who are unhoused, or those who are insecure in their housing, where it seems like, you find out every month that we're worried, what can we do?
Right. I have a big picture ask and then a practical ask. I think the big picture ask is have hope on behalf of them. Have hope on behalf of the person that you think there is no hope for. Have some hope. Because if you have hope, then you can be an instrument of either connecting them or helping them out. Even if that step is as simple as literally going home and being like, who's my counselor? Send an email, info at, and you did that, right? The reason I think the bigger question and the bigger ask is to have hope is that person that you see in that state that's that day in that person's life. And when you meet people who've been outside for many years and gone on to like your daughters, right? People that I work with, we have people that come who work with me that were justice involved. If I met them 10 years ago, that's not the person I think they could be today. So I think that's our job, is not to see necessarily the person's circumstances in that moment, but to imagine a future where they can be helped and help themselves and have that dignity restored. And then from that place, think about what you can do. Maybe that day it's simply like in your mind, I have hope for you. I hope you have a great day. Or that day you want to give some food, or that day you want to make that phone call. I don't think we should judge ourselves. It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. But start with believing that there is a path. There's many of us here trying to do that work. We need people's help. And one thing I will put out as a specific ask for Giving Tuesday is there are folks in each community in the greater LA area that are doing outreach and engagement. You can sponsor a team. You can do it for your neighborhood. You can say, we want to support this team, in wherever. And think of ways of doing that. If you have the capacity to give financially, how wonderful. Yeah. Let's find ways of routing that to your local areas. And you can reach out to Healthcare in Action or to you, and you would connect us. Yep. But we will find ways for people to actually do something, because I know so many want to.
Yes. Oh, Dr. Subaiya, first and foremost, on behalf of everyone listening, because I know this is the hearts of this community right now. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that you were obviously going to defer to your frontline team, so let them know. We appreciate you, because we all recognize that we are all, one paycheck away from experiencing homelessness and not one paycheck away from being a billionaire. So the reality is anything we do for others, we are in turn doing for ourselves. And we just thank you so much for showing this love and compassion that makes the world better in general. Thank you. And thank you for telling us so much more about people experiencing homelessness and what we can do to help our neighbors. Thank you for it.
And thank you for sharing the story of your beautiful family. And I'm so happy to hear your daughter's doing well. And yes. It is equally inspiring for me to hear that and to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you. And y'all, I know that this is heavy stuff, but I hope that you listened to the messaging around what we can do, in a world and in a time right now where I think that we can feel so weighted by, all the crises that seem to be coming across our timelines and our feed and our social media. The thing that I hope you really carried away from Dr. Subaiya is that we are capable. And whether it's big or small, local or global, there is something we can do, even if that something is starting with hope. And I'm just so thankful that you show up here with me week after week to learn more about different lives and different ideas and different concepts, and just grow in your own thinking and your own possibilities. So please, for Giving Tuesday, whether it is here to Healthcare in Action, which is a worthy and meaningful cause, or to your local organization that might be doing something to for those who are experiencing homelessness or helping support people who are in need in your community, please take whatever you've got and give, whether it is your time, your resources, your valuable funds, right? Or your voice. Thanks, y'all.